Hello everybody, this is the last of the three YouTube videos I'm doing for this particular picture, and I just wanted to spend some time talking to you about colours and how we're going to deal with the wall here. In the last video there was a notice saying that I used ultramarine, quinacridone rose and cadmium yellow as my three basic colours. It's nice to use a limited palette because you'll find that you're mixing colours together and it brings a unity to the whole picture. So the sort of greys we've got here, or sort of violety bluey grey we've got here, is also slightly stronger on the back of the sheep, and then you'll see it again here as well. So it pulls the colours together. So rather than choose a whole palette for the blossom, a different palette for the wall, and then a different palette again for the rest of the picture and the sheep, you bring the picture together by reusing those colours. But what we want to make sure is that the colours that we've chosen are actually going to give us what we want to achieve. So we'll just practice a little bit of mixing here. So that's our French ultramarine, which works very well, and we know that the French ultramarine with a pinky red will give us some nice interesting violet colours. So that's a sort of soft violet, maybe a little bit more blue here, so that's the softer violet. And then by adding the yellow to that mixture, in this direction obviously we get a nice strong orange, but well, let's go for it. We'll put the blue in here, and you can see obviously the yellow will go green, but a bit more of the blue in that direction, and we start getting some very interesting neutrally grey colours. So let's perhaps a little bit more of that, a little bit more of that, and in different proportions. The colour that initially you think is too green, a little bit more blue, will give you some very interesting greys and some interesting dry stone wall colours, which is lovely. Having said that though, what I wanted to do is add an extra blue for a little bit more sunlight, and if you've printed this out from the link, you might find that there are these extra brighter cerulean blues, and I think in my case it's probably the fault of the printer, but I actually really quite like it. And if you have a look, this cerulean is a sort of turquoisey blue, which is rather lovely, mixed with that, useful for the greens at the bottom, mixed with this, you can green it up, a little bit more red in there, and you've got those nice slightly duller redder colours that work so well. So where the dry stone wall is concerned, what we want to do is we want to do a soft merged wash, and if we look at it slightly sideways we can see that that's just dampish. And what we want to do is almost let the watercolour do the work itself. So we're going to drop some colours in, darker at the bottom, plenty of water, a bit of red here, a little bit of this lovely French ultra, and you find that you can, it's mixing these purples really quite nicely. We'll have slightly greenish in places. So be really loose with it, let the watercolour do the work for you, and if it dries too light you can always re-wet it and do a little bit more work. That is certainly too heavy, so we want to soften that out a little bit more, maybe a little bit more of this blue in here, a little tiny bit of the, yeah, I actually like using the paper as a palette. It's quite handy because you can be really quite spontaneous. Maybe a bit more of this at the bottom. Slightly this little mixture along here. Letting them all merge quite lightly. If you want to, you can certainly add some more water, because even if you get back runs, it will give you that nice texture. So don't worry at all, just go for it and make those interesting marks. Let the colours mix together. And you can always build it up, always add more layers. And let's go for a little bit. Let's go darker at the bottom. Obviously in our main picture we've got the sheep, which are masked out with the masking fluid. Let's have a little bit, just make a little bit more grey, I think, here. A bit more blue. It has some slightly darker bits and pieces here, darker on the bottom. Think of these lovely different colours we've got here. Some of these vertical standing stones, some are heavier than others. If you wanted it a lot more textured rather, you could certainly do something a little bit like the puddling we were doing. So you can actually drop in some colours and see how they flatten, something a bit more like that, and let them back run, let them merge. But leave some pure colour. It's not necessarily realistic, but it is actually quite. Sorry about that. It is actually quite fun, and it shows that you're just pushing the boundaries just a little bit. If we overmix this, we'd lose the pink, we'd lose some of the blues, we'd lose some of those really soft colours. That's why it's always better with something like this to actually mix on the paper rather than completely flatly mix. If we go with something like this, it's a sort of interesting colour, but you can see it's a flat mix, whereas something that's slightly mixed and has vestiges of the main colours within it, it actually gives a much better it's a much better effect. And also you can have some very incidental effects, which is what watercolour does beautifully. There's a bit of yellow that I've left here, and you can imagine that's a little bit of sun-kissed wall. Right, now our wall has dried off a little bit. You can see it's dried very light, so I probably would re-wet it and put some other layers of more interesting colour on, just to get some of the darker areas. But we'll leave that for a moment, and we'll talk about the spaces actually between these stones in the dry stone wall. And it's actually very, very easy to get it wrong. I'm going to show you a number of different ways of doing it, and hopefully you'll decide which way of doing it suits your style better. You can certainly use pen. I would recommend water soluble, just ordinary pencil, watercolour pencil, or you can paint directly with paint. Let me just show you the working directly with paint. What I would suggest that you do first of all is to make yourself a cup of coffee and sit and look at this wall for quite some time, so you have a real idea of how it's put together. And you can see it's actually very random. You've got big stones here, little stones on top of each other, some of them at an angle, some of them are quite squarish, and they're all sort of piled one on top of each other in order to make the wall itself. but they stop at a certain level, so there's a bit of a wobbly line across here, and then you've got the verticals across the top catching a little bit of sunlight. Now, if you want to put these marks in, if we try, first of all, I've mixed a sort of dark colour so you can see what I'm doing, but it's a sort of, I'd go with a sort of dark purpley bluish colour, and see if we can make some of these marks. We'll just put them about here. So we want something quite random. I'd make it quite runny, but what you really need to do is to make sure that when you put these marks in, almost instantly, what you can see there's some quite dark marks between them. Almost instantly, what you want to do is to take them off so they're quite, you're not making too much of a mark on here. I'd suggest that maybe that could already be too hefty, so you can, let me use my other brush just to soften it off a little bit. Can you see? So you're making those marks between the stones, but not making anything too hefty. You can certainly use a pen, if those of you who like pen pictures. I would suggest that if you're going to use pen for this, you should also use pen elsewhere, because just the very dark marks on the wall will look very wrong unless you've got some of the fine twigs in the tree penned, and also parts of the sheep as well. So you could certainly, once again, you can make these quite interesting random marks, but pay quite a bit of attention to the spaces in between, because you can see some of them are really quite strong, and we'll put a fairly hefty one here. But once you tend to separate them up like this, you can see that they possibly could do with a little bit more paint on them, so you might go back and introduce some different colours to them. Let's put quite a big one here. And then, because this is water soluble, what you can actually do with this is soften it up and use a little bit of that colour elsewhere, maybe shade some of the stones themselves. And it has quite a nice look to it. But as I said, be careful, because compared to the rest of your picture, it could be a little too hefty. In which case, as I said, you'd want to use it elsewhere as well. Another thing that works quite well is water-soluble pencil. So you can put some of these strong lines in. Let's do it with some of the stones here. Let's stick one in here and along here. I like this yellow one there as well. So you can put, you might want to go quite a little bit harder here. And then when you think you've done enough, you can soften it up. Maybe something in there, and some little ones. Yeah, but remember to keep referring to the wall, because it's difficult to keep reimagining these different shapes that you're making. You might want to get a bit darker in there if you've. This one I've chosen, it's a sort of browny purple colour. I don't even know what make it is really, but it's quite nice if you want to go fairly subtle. Once again, you can leave it like that, but if you want to, you can soften it with a little bit of water, which is a nice effect again. And the other thing, just try a pencil. If it's a fairly soft pencil, if you don't like the look of it, you can always rub it out. But I quite like the grey effect. I think it's fairly subtle. You can press a little bit harder if you want it to be stronger. And that's quite an interesting effect as well. So good luck with the wall. Enjoy painting it. For those of you who have absolutely careered ahead and finished, I've posted at the bottom, there's a link to some other pictures that are sort of like this that will give you some more blossom and dry stone wall practice. I really hope you enjoy it. I think this is a lovely picture. I've started getting some of your efforts back already, and it's going to make a really superb gallery because they're all looking so lovely. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll speak to you again fairly soon. Bye.